I'm really pleased to be joined on Not the Andrew Marr Show. She's been on before, but it's been a while. Jenny Jones, thank you for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
Now, the reason why I'd like to speak to you is you've been very active in the House of Lords, opposing government legislation that is very restrictive on our civil liberties. And you've taken this to a new level, actually. I think not many people are putting their necks out as much as you are. But what I've noticed is in the last, well, for quite some time, this propaganda against the small boats coming over with refugees, and also the Just Oil protesters seem to be, there's loads of propaganda against them. This has been used, isn't it, by the government to push through legislation that will have much wider impact than on those two issues. Is that what you're seeing?
That's exactly right. And I would like to say that it's not only me opposing a lot of what the government's doing, but in the House of Lords, unlike in the Commons, in the House of Lords, we read all the legislation. It's our job to revise it, to improve it, and to actually make sure it's legal. And so it's not just me opposing. There's been an awful lot of votes just recently. There were several yesterday where the government loses because the bills are rubbish, you know, and they shouldn't be coming to us in the state they're in. And what the government is doing, particularly in terms of trying to make us hate groups, various groups, I think they think that that's going to possibly appeal to, well, the worst kind of voters, people who, you know, are very hard right, and, you know, who perhaps don't like foreigners or don't like disruption and that sort of thing. So the government is actually picking out groups of people to teach us to hate, so that they can pass some of the most terrible legislation. And I've been standing up there for the past few years and saying, this is the worst bill we've seen. And I could say it at almost every subsequent bill, it just gets worse and worse.
So what in particular, I mean, the migrants bill, I mean, can you tell us how they've manipulated that, that it would have bigger, longer term consequences, wider consequences for other people?
On the illegal migration bill, we are actually breaking international law and domestic law. Now they argue, the government argues that we're not, but we actually are. And some of the clauses in there could almost, it's like a 2-year-old jumping up and down and, you know, saying, I want a lolly or something. It's absolutely astonishing. Some of the clauses are so illogical. You have to think, who wrote it? I just don't understand. On the public order bill, another terrible bill. Well, it's an act now. It went through a few weeks back or something. One of the things the government wasn't happy about was that we threw out a part of that said that the police could clamp down on any disruption that was more than minor. Now, anything can be more than minor. You know, a group of parents protesting at big fat cars, you know, not turning their engines off outside schools, or a community group who don't want a development on their doorstep. This, you know, any group of people could be caught up in a law like that. And what the government did, because it was so deeply unhappy about this, it's tried to bring it back in something called a statutory instrument. Now, this all sounds very technical, but actually a statutory instrument is a quick way of implementing and improving laws slightly when they're slightly wrong. But to put something this big in it that has already been thrown out by the House of Lords and was not in the final act is something no government has ever done. So we have a sneaky, cheating government that's trying to get things in by the back door, because statutory instruments are these things that we debate them, but we can't normally stop them. What I'm doing is trying to stop it. And I have put down what we call a fatal motion to kick it out. And it's been interesting who's been able to support me within the House, because of course, if I can't get the votes in the House, I can't get it through and I can't kick out this particular measure. And some Labour people have already said to me they will vote for it against their party's advice. And I'm deeply sorry that the Labour Party doesn't feel that it can vote for it, because I think there's no point in becoming a government if you don't have any principles.
I mean, this sounds like part of Keir Starmer's authoritarian style that he's had on spy cops and other legislation.
No, that's absolutely true. And there's been all sorts of stuff that has gone through the House of Lords and become acts. And I've thought, oh, well, Labour, when they come in, they'll repeal them, obviously, because that doesn't fit with Labour values. But I'm afraid that's not true. And I mean, one of the things that has astonished me about, for example, this sneaky thing that the government's doing on the public order bill, trying to bring something in by statutory instruments, which means that any minister could change any aspect of any law at will, simply on their decision. Now, that's not democracy. And I would have thought the Conservatives would have thought, oh, the next government, if it's Labour, could use that against us. And so let's not be so cavalier with our democracy. But apparently, Labour's not going to fight it. And I'm terribly disappointed at that.
That's really astonishing. So the government can change legislation after it's come in. Can you explain that again? Just spell it out, because it sounds too horrific for me to even comprehend.
Once a bill has gone through both houses and it becomes an act, it gets royal assent and becomes an act. Sometimes little tweaks are needed, and you do that by statutory instrument. And they're always debated, and we have negative ones and positive ones, and we, some we can, grumble about, but most of the time it's not too serious. But what the government's doing now is it's bringing this term, more than minor disruption, back in a statutory instrument, which normally we could not stop, even though we've voted it out once already. My fatal motion will stop it. And what the government could do very easily, it could put down a 2 or 3 line bill and take it through both houses again. And that way it would get the proper debate and it would get the proper democratic oversight. But what the government is doing is trying to avoid democracy. Now, this is a measure worthy of Russia or a repressive regime. It's not what you expect in Britain.
And has have media picked up on this?
Not really, no. There's been, we set up a petition to try to get Labour to stop it, and that's had more than 25,000 signatures, but no, not really. The BBC Radio 4 says it might pick it up on Tuesday when we have the vote in the House of Lords. But there's also something that came out from the shadow Attorney General. I've forgotten her name. And she had completely misunderstood what was happening. And so I'm just wondering, why on earth would Labour not understand exactly how serious this is? And it's not a technicality. It's actually breaking one of our basic parts of our being a democratic country.
Prem, I had no idea about this. As Jenny was saying, it's not been reported on the media at all. This statutory instrument that they can sort of change legislation after it's gone through. This is scary. I think you're muted. There you are.
Yes, I think it is scary, and the use of statutory instruments has accelerated with a huge majority the Tories have in the Commons. Ministers have increasingly assumed what are often called Henry VIII powers, in other words, dictatorship, really. And Labour all too often goes along with the government on this. And I think Jenny is referring to a real constitutional issue here. The constitutional issue is that what happened was what is now the Public Order Act 2023. It had already been passed by the Commons. It was brought to the Lords. Lords then rejected a government amendment. In other words, government pretty late in the day, saying, hey, we've got to change this and make it much more difficult for people to organize and participate in protests. So under the Constitutional Convention, if the House where something originates, in this case the Lords, rejects a proposal to the bill, it can't be considered again. So therefore, the Public Order Act, enacted just before the King's coronation, did not contain this clause. So rather than bringing it back as a bill, they're just bringing it back as a statutory instrument, which is generally reserved for fairly minor adjustments to the law. Now, the Labour Party's response is to table what they call a regret motion. A regret motion means we are unhappy about what you're doing, but we will let the law through. Whereas what Jenny Jones has tabled is saying, you shall not pass. We do not like what you are doing. And I think she's actually correct. You know, I won't go over here about my personal circumstances. I think you know what they are, or what I communicated with you, Crispin, on that. If I am in Parliament, I shall vote with Jenny. I will vote against the party whip, because there comes a time when you have to say something is wrong. And therefore, we can't allow government to make laws through the back door. We can't tolerate Labour simply going along with this. The Labour's approach is that fatal motions are rare. Well, actually, Tories used that in 2005. So there is a precedent in recent years of Tories using fatal motions. And also, I think the real concern with Labour is, oh my God, if we scupper the government this time, they might do the same to us. Well, they might just do it anyway. We're not talking about a party here in government which has respected the rules. You know, we had Johnson illegally prorogued Parliament. Downing Street has been full of lawbreakers, rule breakers. I often wonder why it's not been renamed Bletchley Park. After all, it is full of code breakers. But that is another story. But I shall vote with Jenny if I am in House, and I will make every effort to be in House. The other trick the Conservatives are using is prolonging debates, not giving us enough time. So in the Commons, they don't allow enough scrutiny of the bills. Some people may be aware that last Tuesday, Commons business finished at 2:30 p.m. And many laws are simply not dissected enough. Amendments are not considered. They use their majority to curtail the debate. In the Lords, they refuse to give us enough time. So last Wednesday, the House of Lords sitting began Wednesday afternoon, and it finished 4:20 a.m. Thursday morning. And that was over the illegal migration bill, government refusing even to tell us with the public what the impact assessment is, what the costs would be, what would happen to children who become ill. Will children be separated from parents, refusing to answer any questions? So the debate went on until 4:20 a.m. And that is absolutely ridiculous and abuse of power. So in the Lords, no party has overall control, though the number of Tory peers has been steadily increasing. Even the Tories have been voting against the government in the Lords, saying that what you're doing is unacceptable. So I think I will support Jenny because she is at least striking a blow for parliamentary scrutiny. And I also hate what is contained in the statutory instrument.